Hi, I'm Ricky Deriz, and welcome to the Mind That Ego podcast. Today, I'm joined by Nick Kettles. Nick is a master certified coach and healer with 25 years of experience in the human potential movement. Before becoming a coach, Nick worked for 15 years as an integrated breath therapist, Reiki healer, meditation teacher in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, and guide to sacred sites in the British Isles. As a journalist, his writing has featured in The Guardian, The Independent, The Ecologist, and he has produced radio shows for the BBC. He's trained thousands of new coaches and business leaders to leverage the power of coaching skills in the workplace, and he guides individual seekers to integrate their shadow and to discover purpose and spirituality through their humanity. His years of teaching and insight inspired the Thresholds of the Soul coaching program to assist others on their journey. And most importantly, Nick is a personal mentor and friend of mine. So I'm delighted to welcome you onto the show.
Thank you, Ricky. It's just a pleasure to be here. And thank you. It's been an adventure coming to meet you and get to know you and see the growth of Mind That Ego. So it's a real honor to be a guest on your show.
So usually I would introduce the context of your background and how you got involved in spirituality. Mm-hmm. But today we're going to actually structure the talk around the spiritual path and around the kind of process that we go through. Do you want to maybe talk to, as an introduction, the importance of that and why it matters to have a structure and a context for the spiritual path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think spiritual path is typically a metaphor that we use to help frame and structure our spiritual development once that becomes important to us. And there are several distinct stages that I've noticed that I went through that I see others going through, and actually knowing what stage you're in sometimes can help you in integrating that stage and then also recognizing what's next rather than circling back round to the beginning to a state of disenchantment and effectively throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is that we are seeing a massive shake-up in consciousness in the world today. And I think many people are acknowledging this is the tipping point or the turning point that many people have talked about for a long time. We are in the midst of it. So there are a lot of kind of wake-up moments happening, a lot of aha moments happening. And you and I thought that at this time it would be useful to offer a map, not the map, but a map for people who are having an opening or an awakening of some sort and are looking for a way to orientate. So that's really, I guess, the intention that we have here, right?
Yeah, I agree. And what I like is that I feel that it applies to those who aren't necessarily looking for a specific, religious structure or a certain tradition. Yeah. So it's very much for like people that are maybe feeling disorientated as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it can be overwhelming, right? When you've got all this information, like where do you begin?
Well, that's I guess one of the things that we were talking about earlier is that we were saying that one of the first stages of the awareness of a spiritual path is that there are so many different experiences available. It's like being either at your all-you-can-eat buffet, or you're going on a shopping spree. There's you can go into the shop of the Toltec agreements, you can go into the shop of Reiki healing, you can go into the shop of breath work, and then just continue. The list is endless of the options that you have to begin to explore essentially a contact with a different reality, a different energy. Most people would tend to start, I think, from either one of two things. One is that they contact a different energy that feels powerful, or they are cognizant that they're also contacting a different framework or a different mindset, a different perspective on their reality. And usually those two things converge at some point.
And it tends to be for a lot of people, that might be through trauma, right? Like a dark night of the soul or kind
Absolutely.
of an existential despair and looking for answers in that way. And for others, there could be a spontaneous awakening. So with that, I guess like a good starting point would be to look at that as a segue. Let's say someone's just starting on the path. there's a sense of where do I begin? And they're looking at these different options. I like the term window shopping that you use as this stage. It's like the kind of beginning stages. You're feeling enthusiastic about what's in store, maybe a bit overwhelmed. Could you talk to that process of how do you discern and what is the value of window shopping?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge what you said, which I think something you and I share in common is actually first contacting some of these experiences from a difficult time, traumatic awakening or awareness of traumatic experience or residual trauma that's not resolved from the past. And I think, sometimes therefore you're contacting these experiences from a place of necessity, from a place of safety, to preserve your safety and security, your existence, essentially, especially if you look at, for example, the 12-step program, which has that idea of another reality embedded in it. So if you've realized that you have addictive tendencies, you're subject to compulsive behavior, those frameworks, the 12-step programs can be phenomenal in helping you find stability. However, others are often get in contact with these experiences of different energy or another reality as a lifestyle choice, So we see that in the yoga movement. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's, they may only be beginning that exploration from a place of recognizing that my relationship to my body or my health is not desirable anymore, maybe from a place of burnout, being caught in the hamster wheel. So whatever it is that leads us to that exploration, I don't think it matters. And I'm all for encouraging people to have as many experiences as possible. Yeah. But while doing so, start to ask the question, what's the consistency here? What is consistent about these different experiences? Now, they're all going to be different. It's like different flavors of ice cream. Yeah. But at some point, you've got to ask, they're all made from egg, sugar, and cream, right? Yeah. And so I think that's the best way to approach it, is from an openness, curiosity, enthusiasm, but also staying alert and asking that question, what do these have in common? Where are they pointing me towards? What kind of relationship to my life itself, are they inviting me to consider?
That is a powerful point in terms of a kind of perennial philosophy or perennial experience behind. I think that really underpins something we have in common as well with I think the way that we've explored spirituality, is understanding that the essence of it is beyond any doctrine, any kind of philosophical movement, and looking at, use the word consistency, what quality is there that is consistent that you can rely on in a way that is empowering when you're looking for these experiences. That's an important aspect.
So from the get-go, the beginning, developing a bit of discernment, you don't have to have all the experiences, asking that question, what is nourishing for me, first of all, and what is serving my immediate needs, but then also what feels congruent from the point of view of perhaps further exploration. I remember when I was starting to open up to this kind of exploration, I was, I think, a compulsive shopper as well. This way I was trying everything, and I was having a great time, and I was sort of collecting experiences. And there was this moment where I was like, what do they all have in common? There was, I was starting to realize that the conversations I was having with some friends were very nuanced. It's like we're comparing very similar flavors of ice cream and kind of comparing and contrasting, and then start to say, well, yeah, it's energy at the end of the day, right? Yes. They're both viewpoints, or they're both offering viewpoints or frameworks that are pointing me towards not an alternate reality, although that's what it seems initially, right? But a different way of relating to life and the world. And I think there's also a point that comes where you say, you may be visiting these experiences in order to kind of take the heat off or the pressure off of the tension of your current life. And then there's this also, I think, an awakening where you go, maybe this actually is just another way to live, and it's not something I do at the evenings or the weekends, and I start to incorporate it more and more into my everyday life. And I might start to question some of the assumptions and choices that are embedded in the way I currently live my life. So it becomes less of entertainment and curious exploration, but more the experience and information I've acquired from that initial exploration causes me to kind of have sometimes in the Christian tradition, they call it a come to Mary moment. It's like a serious conversation with myself, about, what are my choices in life? And I think that's an important part of the process and the journey as well.
Even from what you've shared, there's so much within that. And I can see within my path as well, like the ego traps or the kind of the superficial stumbling blocks of this stage of, like, you use the word entertainment. Yeah. We live in a culture that commodifies spirituality heavily. And it's Absolutely. Like, are you gaining experiences for the ego? Are you gaining it to show others, as a sense of aggrandizement or to boost esteem in that way? And I guess what I really respect in you and what I like about your path is that you have that integral ability to discern, right? And this is something we've spoken about a lot, and the power of discernment, not only of like, what do I choose and what do I practice, but when do I have that serious talk with myself and say, this is a lifestyle. It's not, I'm not like going to use this term, I'm a spiritual person, but it's actually, I'm embodying what this essence is. Can you identify like the core of that? Because I was thinking about this before our talk, and it's almost as if there's an inner compass that if you listen, it's not always that loud, but if you're really sensitive to it, whether you're reading a teaching, whether you're listening to a teacher, you might even stumble across like, a work of fiction that resonates something in you. What is it that you find allows you to go, oh, this is something to lean into? This is a direction to move in a way that feels authentic and embodied and not ego-based?
It's a great question. There's a number of things to respond to in that. First of all is to acknowledge, yes, there's a lot of snake oil out there. and actually, I think it's okay if you get burnt once or twice, because you learn something from it, and then thank you for the acknowledgement as well, that I have discernment. But the honest truth is it was hard won from actually having experiences. We might say I was blinded by the light, essentially. It's like the experience that was being offered was so kind of palpable, so bright, so intense that I kind of relaxed and stopped, I let go of that part of essential part, I think, of being an autonomous human being, sovereign human being that can question, is this right for me? And also being susceptible to several experiences where what was on offer was conditional, right? So the spiritual experience that's on offer, but to advance in that pathway, there were conditions that, frankly, were just about tying you into the relationship with the organization. And so thank you for the acknowledgement, but it was hard won, frankly. So and now I've forgotten what the other point was.
I love your honesty, but I was actually what I wanted to say is that this point that you make, hugely valuable, being blinded by the light. I feel like this is actually a kind of another stage. So you started window shopping, and there's this process of I'm experiencing non-ordinary states of consciousness, and there is a risk of being attached. And I would talk to it as, for me, experiences of being attached to enchantment or feeling the loss when you have a certain state change. I want to reference Stealing Fire. I've not read it yet, but you've recommended this book to me by Jamie Will and Stephen Kotler around chasing these mystical experiences. What was the point where you realized where did you realize you were caught up in that, and how did you kind of ground yourself and through that?
I'll respond to that in a moment. It's a really, I think, personal experience is always informative because it's real. But the first thing is that sometimes blinded by the light is happening because you are kind of your awakening or your opening, your energetic, we might call it energetic opening and awakening to a different way of seeing, is accelerated. And in the Vedic tradition, they talk about a type of light called ojas, and technically the translation is it's a bit like the light that gets created in when you have a dirty lamp, like a storm lamp, it's dirty. There's a particular type of oil you can put in it that is designed to clean the wick. The wick has got soot on it, and so this oil helps burn bright very quickly and burns off all the impurities. Now, often what's happening when we start to contact these, non-ordinary states of consciousness, as you say, there is actually some kind of trigger moment where we suddenly are we ignite, literally, and so we are not just blinded by the light outside, we are experiencing a lot of light inside, this, and we might mistake it for the end destination as well. That's a risk. That's the first risk. We might circle back to that. We've talked about that before. But I may also, experience a lot of bliss, and a lot of expansion, and a lot of awareness that is overwhelming to the point that I can't see some of the nuance clearly, and I might lack discernment as a result. I remember you might say my OJAS experience is phenomenal. It's a beautiful experience. And so it's something to celebrate, but to the best of your ability, you got to try and stay grounded and retain a little bit of critical thinking during that period of time, because it can be disorientating as well. You might find yourself, thinking, wow, I'm walking on water. This is amazing. I'm quitting my job. I'm quitting my house. I'm going to donate the money from my house to the organization that facilitated this wonderful experience for me. And then suddenly, and then there is a moment, of course, where that light starts to burn out, because its purpose is to burn off impurities. And we might say at a human level, that's physical, mental, and emotional, or actually it's a detox experience, but that will begin to wane, and what we might get then is a disenchantment where we feel like, wow, I've lost my enlightenment moment, and, and it's not working anymore. Instead of realizing actually it's a bit like a fire, when you light a fire, it roars at the beginning, and then it starts to settle down. And I noticed that in my fireplace downstairs in our house, there's a moment where it's just kind of like it's retaining its heat, and it doesn't, just needs a little bit more put on top of it. So it's not burning as brightly, it's not roaring and making a noise, but it's kind of settled down. So there's a transition period that we need to trust, and we can get lost in that moment there. But for me, the big experience was actually having that OJAS, what I'm calling an OJAS experience, where I was just so expanded that it just kind of accelerated my desire for more. And I was like an avid window shopper, try anything. And in fact, what I started to realize is I was chasing the bliss. I was scared that this amazing, blissful experience I was having in my body, which was a body that had been hurt and damaged up until I started this exploration in my early 20s through, misuse of food, misuse of relationships, misuse of drugs and other substances. And so my body was feeling so much liberation. I didn't want to lose it. I was like, this is great. So I became a bit of a bliss junkie. I chase experiences, and I had a lot of fun doing it. I mean, but there was also some times where I just lacked discernment, and I'd say, okay, I'll sign up for anything, and I find myself entangled with some crappy relationship or relationships with organizations or teachers that were perhaps, lacking in discernment themselves. So,
What comes to mind when you talk it is the word, well, there are two that come to mind. One is forgiveness and one is patience. And they come to mind because I think, also for me, having spent so long depressed and oscillating between like panic and numbness, you go through an awakening experience and it's like, oh, this is it.
This is it.
Like, this is it. Like, wow. Like, and there's an innocence to it almost, like a feeling of I've stumbled across something. And I'm saying this, there are people listening that are in this process where they kind of identify it, that there's so much forgiveness. We've both done it. There's a lot of trial and error on the path. And as you say, discernment is often hard fought. It's hard won. It comes from looking in the wrong direction or getting caught up. And, this bliss junkie mode is a form of attachment at the end of the day. And I think that's a core teaching, right? It's non-attachment to states or anything that is impermanent. One thing I would like to circle back briefly before maybe, because we're touching upon now disenchantment, which is the next stage. But I feel like it's something worth clarifying around, you've had contact with different teachers and different traditions. I've probably had I've definitely had less, but I think I'm more, I don't want to say mistrusting, but that's probably true. I think my path has been very much one of solitude, and I've kind of emerged from that, and I've built relationships with people over time, like such as yourself. How do people know where the shops are? How do people get directions to the shop? Because, if they're like, okay, well, there's this guru down the street, seems to know what they're talking about. They've got techniques that allow me to experience bliss. Clearly they're enlightened. Do I go and follow what they say? Or there are books on Advaita Vedanta, there are books on these different traditions. Like window shopping, how do you arrive there? How do you get to that stage? And in this especially of a time where you can Google all sorts of information now, how do you have that kind of base level discernment of what windows to look at and which ones to kind of move past swiftly?
I think it really depends on what your initial needs are. What is your initial entry point, and that's either going to be that you need, a mental, emotional support for some challenges, at a psychotherapeutic level, that you've kind of hit a roadblock, there's some kind of constructive breakdown happening, or you're approaching it because your body needs healing. I think I was in a situation where I needed both, so I was window shopping widely and avidly. So I think it really depends on the need. And sometimes, actually, to your point, when you enter into this exploration from a place of quite strong need, that motivates you to be proactive in being a good a good shopper. It's like doing your research, taking references, etc. And then, however, if you're just kind of dipping into some of these experiences to kind of assuage or take the edge off of your current reality, then it can take longer before you start to say, okay, what does this really represent? So where do you find the windows? I think ultimately we have to follow intuition, and recognize that there's a wonderful synchronous experience that starts to unfold when I start to ask the question, then suddenly I start to see things differently. I hear things differently. I might meet someone who says, have you tried this? And so we start to trust the process of universe talking back to me and offering signposts. Yeah. And I think that's got to be the best way to approach it. Of course, Google can help. The number of times the number of times I've researched something on Google and tried it, and then it hasn't actually ended up being as useful for me as when it's happened through coincidence. Someone has said, try this. And then that actually, before we move to the disenchantment piece, is actually an important thing, is because from recognizing that there is some kind of narrative unfolding, sometimes you meet people along the way who are, they act as what you might call a threshold guardian, which is a wonderful archetype. It's like someone who stands on the path and either, sometimes in films they say, no, you're not ready, or they're friendly and they point in the right direction. And I had two key threshold guardians at early parts of my path that I'm so grateful for. And one, essentially, we sat down, had a beer at the end of a shift that we were working at a cinema in London. We used to work at a cinema, and we used to sit down at the bar after we were closing up at midnight and have a beer. And we were talking one night, and I'm so grateful to him. We were talking about all of these window shopping experiences, and he took a moment to take charge and say, you do realize that this is all about, developing a new relationship with your mind and its capacity to create reality. And I remember when he having that moment, I felt my head was exploding. It was just like expanding. And it was suddenly like someone had just taken the dial on the TV, one of those old TVs.
I remember
and sharpened the picture. And I was like, whoa. And then suddenly something came into place. And I think my path and what this path served had far more clarity as a result of it. And I was more discerning, I think, in recognizing that it had a purpose, to detox my emotional body, detox my mind and detox my physical body so that I could make a clearer connection, you know, the vertical connection with spirit. So it gave me a context. So that was the first one. And then the second one was very, very kind man in a men's group that I was part of. As I was the youngest in the men's group and he was the oldest, and sadly he's passed now, and you know, I miss him because I'm so grateful for what he offered me. And he noticed that I was kind of this avid shopper. I was all over the place. I had like 7 or 8 spiritual practices. And he just said, very slowly, he said, you know, you're at a stage now where it's probably better to commit to one or two compatible or one path, and stick at it for a little while, a couple of years, he said, because you won't get the full benefit of any of them until you go deep, right? So it needs your sole focus. And that was really powerful because he gave me permission to acknowledge what I think I intuitively knew, which was all roads lead to Rome.
Yeah.
But you're only going to progress to Rome metaphorically by committing fully to the pathway that you're on and the one that resonates most with you. And I did that, you know, and actually ended up being more than 2 years. It was more like 8. And you end up getting a far richer experience of this reality by going deep with one. So you might call it the narrowing or deepening of the path, you know. So
yeah, which actually, Nick, that is the next step. I was trying to jump ahead.
Sorry.
Disenchantment.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. I was getting carried away with the enchantment talk. Yeah, this is what I absolutely love about what you just shared, is understanding through this awakening process the interactive element of reality. Yeah. And the role of synchronicity and coincidence and serendipity, and how we're not really, the ego is not in control, and there are forces at play that are guiding this path, be it through meeting someone, be it even just through, you know, one of the books that had the biggest impact on my awakening, Essential Spirituality, that came from a spontaneous, I've got no idea why, I just walked in a secondhand bookshop with my friend, and I was like, oh, there's a book on spirituality. I'll keep talking. Nick's phone's ringing. I'll keep riffing on it.
Yeah, we're good.
We
carry on.
But yeah, I went in and something drew me to this book. And I know you've said before, I think it was the Celestine Prophecies. There was a book that has like an energy to it, and it was almost as if this book was glowing. And I was quite skeptical at that point. I certainly wasn't consciously interested in spirituality. And I looked at my friend and I was like, I might get it. Like, I don't really know why I'm getting this book, but I think I'm going to get it, you know, see what happens. So I did, and I followed that intuition. The first time I read it, no connection. It was just like, it was flat. And I was thinking like, what is this? You know, what is this spirituality? I don't buy it. I never have, probably never will. Went through within the next couple of months, got into meditation, and had, you know, you talk of this like moment, the open-mindedness. Meditation offered that to me, and then I returned to the book, and it was alive. It was alive. It was not flat. It was the energy behind what I was reading was like the marker for me. It was like, and I knew it felt true. And I feel that truth, we have that inner recognition of truth, and it's in the heart. And there might be, you talk of purity. This is important to kind of decondition the mind and get beyond fear and the barriers around the heart, the barriers around discernment. But there does seem to be not only a seeking impulse in the majority, or if not everyone, even if it's subtle, but a discernment of truth, even if it's quiet and if it's very, very almost barely noticeable, in contrast to the noise of daily living and the noise of fear and hysteria and, you know, worst case scenarios.
That can be a problem, of course, is the amount of background noise that we're now dealing with, the amount of white noise in our world. So to actually recognize that inner recognition, as you said, of something that resonates can be challenging. And perhaps just a slightly deeper perspective on this, you know, the the dialogue with the universe is, this is a viewpoint I heard from the teacher Drunvalo Melchizedek, who's probably solely responsible for everything that we currently know about sacred geometry, flower of life, seed of life. And I worked with him in the late 90s, and something that he said is, he said that, you know, everyone has their own unique wake-up code. That was the key thing. It's just like, and so he said it doesn't matter what it is, but there's going to be something that is uniquely reflects our code, if you like, our spiritual code. And he said that was one of the reasons why he made the workshop that he was delivering at the time so varied, right? You know, he talked about everything. He talked about the alternative history of the earth, dolphins, other planets, pyramids, you know, and he effectively say, you know, what I'm doing there is I'm offering as wide a range as possible of, you know, is this your wake up call? This is what he said. Is this your wake up call? Yeah. Is it dolphins? Is it pyramids? Is it the Syrians? Is it UFOs? Is it sacred sites? Is it alternative health things? And so he was saying everyone has their own unique code, if you like, that is, he even suggested that it also is encoded to, you know, be activated at a particular time as well, which I think is also a profound insight, because you have to really deepen your trust with the universe to embrace that. So yeah, there's the other perspective, is that when the experience that is right for you to kind of unlock your spiritual code, your moment of awakening comes, it will come at the perfect time, and it will be in the perfect shape and form to do its job. So I hope that's true en masse.
Yeah. I think also, because I tried, I bought Meditation for Dummies probably when I was like 19 and tried it. I think I even went through a stage of just staring at candles and being like, what is this meditation? It doesn't do anything. You know, and then it was actually when I was at uni and I was experiencing psychosis, that because that is a form, I won't go too far into that tangent, but that is a form of receptivity and opening to a lot of information filtered through trauma without, and I think the purifying process can bring out that shadow element as well.
Absolutely.
I could go down that route. But what I want to look at is just to point out where we are, right? So we've looked at window shopping and this kind of initial chaos of like, where do I begin? Like, and there are experiences that are great and they're offering all these different insights, and it's easy to get carried away. I jumped ahead and went to Disenchantment and we've kind of explored this narrowing of the path. I feel naturally we've looked at this, like how do you discern, how do you kind of refine so that you find a path to Rome that is more direct, one that is right for you and your unique kind of expression. When, because you know, I know in exploring this, you looked at the role in which the relationship to life changes, right? And we spoke about the interaction and synchronicity and that kind of metaphysical realm. But what about the which I think is common, it was for me, like the fragmentation between, okay, I was living my life. I've now found a path and I feel like this is good for me. But it's actually creating separation from my relationships, my relationship to the world, to people, to systems, to, you know, political ideologies, to everything that I previously related to in a certain way is changing. And that can almost feel quite isolating for a lot of people, I think, because it's almost as if there's a world out there and this is my spirituality, and then there's the world. If you talk to that, like, how do you bridge that in part of this narrowing process?
I think you articulate it really beautifully, Ricky. There is a kind of a point where it seems like there's two coexistent worlds, you know, a fragmentation, as you put it. I think you articulate that really beautifully, and I know you've experienced that, and I have too. And I think in my case, actually, there was something I couldn't help it happening. And one of this, when I reflect on that, is that the awakening was so strong, the energetic opening was so strong. And I think the ojas was so intense because I was so toxic. It's usually there's usually a
correlation.
It's in inverse proportion, I think is the mathematical term, right? that actually what happened through the energetic opening is that it really opened me. I was really open emotionally. It made me super sensitive, development of psychic abilities. And I couldn't integrate with the world that I had previously been able to become immune to, because I kind of like had a Teflon mask and shell around me, But the moment I start to drop that and break open that and start to develop a new relationship with my body just could not handle that. So I would, I gravitate to as many experiences as possible that, kept that alive. And because I was just so open and sensitive. And in fact, I won't say which newspaper, I was working at a large newspaper at the time in the early 90s in the UK. And I was having the opening while I was working there.
You said woking.
Yeah, I did, exactly. I was woking, I was awakening while I was working at a newspaper, which I currently perceive as being totally one of many papers that's responsible for keeping people asleep. So, you talk about, trying to wake up or having that awakening, experiencing such kind of dense, we'd call it dense, energetic environment was just intolerable, and I quit, and my family were just, I was a young man who'd set out saying, this is the career I want in journalism, landed a great job in a very prestigious newspaper, very low down, I was just one step up from fax collector, but you got your foot in the door, now you're leaving, you're an idiot, why are you doing that? But I really had to, because I knew that my health and my emotional, mental healing and spiritual development was critical. And so I had to kind of take a leap of faith, say, I'm going to travel the path less traveled. I'm going to walk that, and I'm going to trust that it will lead to somewhere fruitful, So sometimes it's a necessity is the short answer. And then sometimes, maybe you are more stable, you're less fragmented, you've not gone through the dark night of the soul, but still you're starting to see it. And I think essentially what you resist persists. The more you ignore the way these words are clanking into each other, the more that might become a challenge for you. So,
there's so much that I feel people will resonate with in what you share, and me too, like especially the sensitivity and the openness. And there's a lot in our culture which is unnatural. And I think when you tap into a natural essence, you do feel that contrast more. And there's a need to harness that sensitivity, I find. And you've helped me immensely with that. Meditation is an absolute refuge for me in that sense. There is this, you say the word necessity, as these worlds collide, it's as if as you change and you resonate differently, you could say your vibration changes, to use that terminology. The things that were previously held in place, they don't have the hold on you that they used to. And then there's a very, like in my experience, really quite painful process of like, like the way I'm living my life, I'm experiencing this inner harmony or resonance. And I know what I wish to experience and attract. But when I look at my life, there are a lot of behaviors that I'm doing that no longer fit, relationships that don't feel right. For me, this path was like, I'm going to stop taking drugs. I'm going to, stop drinking alcohol. I'm going to change what I eat. I became very much aware that I'm someone who's here to spend a lot of time alone, and a lot of time in solitude, and really going through like a strong grieving process of, I'm going to lose people. That's, I think, a core thing for me to integrate, is that I'm going to lose people. People won't stick around, and it has happened. And I trust, that people that are meant to be will be. And there's almost this, you know, I think we've spoken about this word before, but from the common understanding of this idea of obligation, it's almost as if an awakening, it highlights, oh, these are the behaviors or the relationships that I feel obliged in I know there's a different meaning for this, but in terms of, I was holding that in place and it didn't feel right. And now I've got no choice but to change because this inner compass or this inner fire is so bright. The external has to now reflect it.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of grieving.
Well, there's a grieving, and then also this is I think we talked about this at some point in one of the precepts or the of the Advaita Vedanta tradition is something called tapas, which sometimes is interpreted as, you know, kind of intense spiritual practice, but actually it also points to the need to actually make some, you know, solid decisions to prioritize the practice, right? I want to optimize the environment, you know. So does it serve me to, you know, narrow the path and deepen my commitment to the spiritual path while, you know, staying in a toxic relationship with someone that actually is dragging, you know, judges my commitment and you know, is not supportive of that? That's a question that you have to confront at some point, you know. I really take a stand for this should not be interpreted as, you know, leave your family, you know, cut off yourself from the world. You know, I really don't think that's healthy at all. It's just a matter of being mindful of what's needed to optimize the conditions of your practice so that you can start to really nurture that. To a point where it becomes resilient enough to actually have more contact with the world. I think I've come full circle over about 30 years where, because of my work, I often go into, you know, some situations where there's a lot of, you know, the energy is sometimes, you might say, all over the place, and people are coming into the experience from all different levels of previous experience, skepticism versus openness. And, you know, I'm able to be with that and be present with that without it knocking me off center. And I retain my sensitivity that I've developed. So certainly it's just another stage, you know.
That's the elixir, right? Like being able to remain centered, because the inner work, the inner connection or essence is stable enough
and strong enough.
Yeah, because I feel exactly the same. And I really do want to point out, I think it's important too, that we kind of live in a culture, a throwaway culture, one where like challenge seems to be discarded. And I read so much through various means, you know, especially a lot of, I would call it like online blogging or like pop psychology or pop spirituality. And, you know, there's a lot of labeling, there's a lot of terminology like toxic relationships and you know, negative vibes and all this kind of stuff. And there is balance to be found. And you point to this, there's balance in actually these relationships are the learning a lot of the time. And sometimes it's right to leave, but sometimes the component you view as toxic is actually the lesson, is the teaching. And if you can work with that supposed toxicity, you're healing yourself. So it's like a path of seeing how the environment reflects, but then what you can learn from it, and when you have to change the environment first, and kind of always being in a symbiotic dance between environment and inner.
I think it's a matter. I think the Buddhist tradition of the Sangha is really healthy here. You know, you have a place of refuge. You know, of course, the place of refuge ultimately is inside, but you optimize the conditions that allow you to optimize your connection. You know, period. You know, and you may step out of that space to interact, as you say, with a wide range of other experiences. But you have a place to retreat to consistently. And I think the other thing worth saying here is when we're talking about these two different worlds, you know, of course, there's only one world, which is that there is a unified field of consciousness that underlies everything. And we are contacting that through some of these experiences, and we are calling it a different world. Actually, it is the, you know, true reality. And you know, I think the Matrix is a useful metaphor. You know, it's a cliche, but I think it holds up. You know, it's not that people who are maybe, say, committed to the church of consumerism and atheism and are experiencing a different reality. They just have a particular viewpoint on their reality, and they're not willing to consider alternative points of view. You know.
Yeah, and it's which you talk to as like the essence of non-duality and oneness, and how the illusion is separation. The illusion is mind made.
Absolutely, yeah. And we can perpetuate that with our spiritual path by saying this is a different reality. You know, this is the good reality, and that one is the one I reject. So we have to, I think, to your point, we have got to dance with the dualistic nature of our experience, but remember that actually what underpins that is this unifying field and this singular narrative of human beings evolving into greater awareness of who they are and what is possible in terms of the relationship they have with each other, and the terms of the relationship they have with the earth, in terms of the relationship they have with the unseen as well, the unseen world. So which I think is super exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, because it is this I think we've been similar, like for me, this inner cultivation, this circular inner cultivation, and then the terminology might be like exalted consciousness, but an experience of no longer is my spirituality something I do when I meditate. No longer is it a transcendent thing, like something I'm trying to transcend to get somewhere, but actually it's in everything that I see. It's in the trees outside, you know, it's in the way that the light reflects off the desk, and the way that the sensations in my body move, you know, the vibration in my throat when I talk, you know, all of these different elements, that's all part of it. It's all part of the essence.
Well, we're kind of skipping the disenchantment piece, but it's so important what you're saying, because actually that's, I think, as you say, the more, if I optimize my spiritual practice, you know, I do that through some, you know, maybe some tough decisions to give it space. Ultimately, as I commit, then I start to, as you see it in a wider range of things again, and possibly also including in the world that I judge as being a blue pill world, for example. I go back into there and I say, wow, there's so much beauty here, there's so much humanity, and God, I judged it so harshly, you know, because, you know, I was in pain and I was suffering and I was looking for release, but I come back into it and I see it differently, you know, and even maybe looking back on my life, I see things that aren't overtly spiritual, but I see their love and I see their humanity in them, you know. And so it's a kind of re-enchantment, to use your language, with the world you rejected. You start with a re-enchantment with the world you never knew existed or that was lost, and then by deepening it, and to the point, as you're saying, you reach an exalted state where you're seeing it not just inside but everywhere. You become re-enchanted with the world you left.
How beautiful is that?
It is beautiful. It is beautiful. And I'm constantly moved by that. I'm probably more touched by that now than I was at the time I was on my spending spree, jumping into multiple experiences. You know?
I'll put a box around the conversation to point where we are, so people don't get lost. But that is also another potential sticking point, I think, for people who compartmentalize their spirituality in terms of my spirituality is when I'm at the Buddhist center, or my spirituality is when I'm on a yoga retreat, or XYZ. And okay, so where we're at in terms of the structure, so we looked at window shopping, the narrowing of the path, the refinement. I think we've touched upon disenchantment throughout, you know, this process of kind of re-enchantment and disenchantment and that cycle. And we've started to touch upon integration. Was there anything else with disenchantment?
Disenchantment with the spiritual practice.
Okay,
it's like from the narrowing of the path, you know, it requires some discipline. You know, what's fun about spending spree shopping stages, it's fun and there's variety, and as we know from neuroscience today, the mind loves variety, so it's constantly being fed. And so when you narrow the path, which is absolutely necessity to actually deepen and experience and contact that transcendent space at a far richer level, it can starve the mind's need of variety. And we can experience boredom, we can experience coming to sit or hitting the mat to do some yoga for, oh god, I'm done with this, my body hurts, or it just doesn't seem to be working anymore. And I might become disenchanted for that reason, but I might also become disenchanted because life happens in a way where my spiritual practice is disrupted by contingent events that I did not plan. So for me, in my world, I had just moved to a new house, the one I'm living in right now. It's been the first time I had a garden that was private enough for me to build a fire pit, which is part of my spiritual practice. So I was just like, this is the vision, this is what I've been looking for. I started to have time to do my practice really deep, maybe 2 or 3 hours a day, and I was just like, yeah. And what I hadn't realized is, of course, I was creating a wall, creating my castle, and then something came and knocked it down, which was the sudden death of my mother, and that just kind of turned the world upside down. And I'm having to support family members through their grieving process, through my own, etc. And suddenly I got hardly any time for my practice. So I lose it, or I become disenchanted with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to recognize, that that's not a setback, but actually an opportunity. I think that's the key thing. You need to, if that happens or that's happening to you, it's not a setback, it's an opportunity, which is, I think, points to the integration that you were talking about.
Yeah. There's an author, Ryan Holiday, talks about Stoicism, and he's got a book called The Obstacle is the Way, which is similar to what you say. And that is, it really points to, I think I'm smiling because I feel I can relate to that in my journey, this process of putting walls up. And I think it's necessary maybe at some point. I know when I went on Vipassana, Goenka says that the last video lecture, he says, you have to put boundaries around the garden. You have to put a fence up. It might be that you go back into the world and then people talk to you in a certain way. They expect certain things of you. Of course, that's another element, is how you change and how you adapt, and then seeing the way that people view you, like the old you, for example. But that is necessary, but life is not going to comply. Life is not going to comply with that fence. If you're trying to control your spiritual practice, and it's like, right, this is it. I've got to meditate X amount each day. I've got to, go on retreat every month or whatever. For me, I can't think of a better demonstration than my romantic relationships, and particularly the relationship I'm in now, which is conscious, but it brings up a lot of shadow work, and I can kind of fall into the trap of being like, oh yeah, I'm really balanced and I'm really centered, and I'm like really high in awareness and emotional control, and then get into a conflict, and then that has to be the practice, right? It's like, absolutely. Maybe the biggest spiritual practice is everything outside of that boundary, everything outside of the walls.
Yeah. Well, and I think you speak to something so beautiful there, is that for so long, spiritual development could only be possible by leaving the world. We see that in the monastic tradition, of course, in various traditions, and even in some shamanic traditions where, for someone to evolve, they had to leave the society, leave the tribe, leave family, and isolate themselves. It was the only way it could happen. And we have a huge mythology about gurus in caves, or going on pilgrimage, whatever that might be, or living apart from society to maintain those conditions. But I think increasingly today's world invites us to take a more tantric approach, and to be clear, as we've discussed before, the sexual element of tantra is just a small percentage of what tantric philosophy points to, and it effectively says embrace the dualistic experience in all its richness and all its emotional complexity, in order to transform those same conflicts within you. So that can be a wonderful transition out of the necessity to actually ring fence your spiritual practice in the first stages, so that you can really consolidate that experience. But at some point, you got to step out of that, re-embrace the life or the world that you were disenchanted with, and use it, see it as a fulcrum, a container in which I can engage in an even deeper level of transformation of self, relationship to self. So relationships are a wonderful vehicle for that, and it can be typical to start to judge that, and I think there's classic examples of spiritual teachers who get really connected to the light, and they're very bright, but then you see they could be triggered, and then they're petulant, or they're impetuous, or they get angry, and then they're justified that with some crap about
it's your ego.
It was your ego.
It's your ego.
This is spiritual anger. It's like, oh, come on, you're a human being. You're in process. Be honest about that. So this place of coming out of the first enchantment with spirituality, then disenchantment with spirituality, and potential re-enchantment with the world you left is it's important that you see their natural stages of the path of spiritual development.
I think that you can develop like a conviction in that, what we've mentioned a few times, like the interactive element of spiritual growth. And you start to see life itself as a meditation, life itself always as an opportunity in how you respond and how you grow through choice. Do I want to choose love, or do I want to choose fear or hate, or apathy, or do I want to always choose the higher choice?
That's so beautiful. And in fact, that would be a great place to start. We could just jump forward to that place. It's just, if you were willing to accept right now that every moment, every breath, every interaction is your teacher, that is guiding you to become clearer in how you see yourself and others and the world as a unique expression of this unifying consciousness that we are born from, that we live in, we swim in, and that we return to, then there'd be no need for this discussion. But that's not an easy practice to engage just like that. We need other reference points first.
I think that is key, the reference point, and particularly, I mean, speaking to my practice, is in meditation, it's the awareness of phenomena, and kind of connecting to pure consciousness, or connecting to the container of all experience, so that you're not entangled with you. And I think this is the thing, like you get entangled. I'm certainly, if I'm in conflict, I feel entangled, and then I can kind of step back. But having that reference point of awareness and observation, or witnessing the unfolding.
That cliche, you're not a human being having a spiritual experience, but you're a spiritual being having a human experience. I think is actually really useful here, because often when we start exploring spirituality, regardless of what stages we go through, we come from a viewpoint that we're a human being that needs a spiritual experience. And then maybe as we start to embed ourselves in that world, and we make the commitments, the narrowing of the path, as we call it, I recognize, actually, I'm a spiritual being, right? And now from that place, I am willing to fully commit to my human experience in all its glory and mess. And I'm not going to avoid stuff anymore, like you said, to build another wall around of my spiritual practice.
And that the risk of that not integrating that is, of course, spiritual bypassing, which I think we're kind of talking to that, that idea of when spiritual ideas cause people to suppress or deny the humanness and the messiness and the shadow elements as well. Nick, we're on integration, right? I'm not losing track, am I? Right.
I'm pretty certain we are.
Yeah. Good. Great. Because I kind of knew this would happen. I feel like intuitively we're going through the stages, and I'm like, oh, we've just been talking about that without formally introducing it, which is
that's good.
It's good. It's good to see that unfurl. this, and I really like this, like the spontaneity and the non-doing of practice. And you mention as the next stage, like, and I don't want to call it necessarily the final stage, but the point of no discernible practice, which you touched upon briefly, where life itself becomes the practice. There's almost this, I've got this image of like a foundation that's built. Well, it's not, it's a scaffolding. It's like a scaffolding to your practice. And maybe that is developed through different experiences or different paths. But I'm going to get creative now, but like the castle of your awakening, the palace of your self-realization requires that scaffolding. And it's like at a certain point that can dissolve, that can go, because you've connected enough.
The neural pathway is strong enough.
Yeah, it's ingrained.
It's ingrained. You start to see that it's overriding the older, you might say, residual imprints. And they talk about that in Vedic philosophy as well. It's like they say that those impressions, of the ideas of separation, they're still there. There are faint impressions, but they're very residual. And the connection to the unifying reality is just so solid that you may kind of momentarily flicker into one of those old impressions, but you course correct much quicker.
That course correction is so much easier when you have the reference, isn't it? When you can also look at, here are times where there's like I've experienced these like real breakthroughs of, I like the term stepping back, because that feels like I'm fused with phenomena, with thought, with old conditioned behavior. And then there's a like, now I'm observing. I've become the observer in this moment. And the thing is, that's the practice of meditation. But when that happens in the moment, when life becomes a meditation, and you're like, oh, I'm fused, and now there's a, so all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm witnessing myself about to make a choice. It's not good for me. And now I'm free. Now I'm liberated from this conditioned behavior that doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve others. And that is what meditation is for, surely, like to get to the point where you're upset. Someone that you love has upset you, and you feel this urge to say something hurtful or to project, and you're like, ugh. And then you step back, and then you're like, no, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to choose to be more loving, and I'm going to be conscious about how I relate, or how I respond when, like, I spill orange juice all over the kitchen floor. These kind of moments of, I have a choice, but now I'm making these decisions consistently enough that choice is becoming habitual.
Yeah, or you actually say the words. Actually, you do succumb to that, but you are quick to know that it was not congruent. You're willing to take full responsibility for your impact, and to stay present to what is it, how it's helping you grow continuously. Raising with my partner, a family, teenage life is explosive, and so trying to hold a spiritual practice or try and look good when you're raising teenagers is overrated. And I remember I was like, oh shit, I got angry again, and it's like, no, relax. It's okay, you were conscious that you are. It's like you might keep falling, but you start to become more and more conscious of it, and you're not afraid to really look at, how does that help me to grow? What else needs to be, you might even feel like you're going back to square one, right? What else can be resolved? Maybe is there still more that at an emotional level, trauma level, that can be resolved? But I'm doing it from such a place of self-compassion and awareness, as opposed to desperation, perhaps, which is often where we start. I need to heal, because if I don't, then I don't see the point of living. So there's something to say about the spiritual practice itself. I think that, at least this has been my experience, is that we increasingly are more spontaneous with our spiritual practice. And we may drop it completely, but we may continue to our practice. But when we do, we're fully aware of of how the construct of the practice is, every expression of it is me, right? It's me doing this to something that looks something different, that to acknowledge something. So I'll give you an example. In one of the paths I follow, oftentimes you are in the Vedic Hindu tradition, you're making a like a little ritual or a puja in front of the image of a devata, a god with a small g, which we understand in the West is very similar to an archetype. It's like an energy that lives within me. But at first, when I begin that practice, I see it as something completely different. Ganesh is a god, and I am making an offering to receive the benefits from something outside of me. So it's something that, it's a ritual, and it helps me center. And I start to notice each time I do it, it's helping me center. And then there's a transition point, I think, comes where I start to recognize, that image there is a reflection of something inside me. So when I'm waving the incense with intention, with sincerity, and reciting very powerful prayers, I'm doing it to awaken that energy within myself as well. And then there's another stage that comes where I recognize I'm all of it. I'm the incense stick, I'm the mantra, etc., etc. And so, maybe there's no need to do the ritual, to do the actions. I can actually internalize all of them. So I don't, I can just sit and internalize the actions, and I create the same effect. But I might choose to do it externally because it's a beautiful thing to do. So I think it's important to say, we don't have to throw your practice away per se. It's just, it becomes more of a choice. And then I think you might loosen up as well about, being too fixed about when you do it. You're more in choice. In the last couple of years, I've missed some of the festivals that are kind of part of the calendar within the tradition I follow. And I think in the past I would have felt like, I could do better. So no, I just missed them. It's fine. I was fully present. So there's a real kind of conscious and more deliberate choice to engage with the practice as an activity itself.
This, what you share is so important, especially ritual. As I know in a lot of Jungian philosophy, there's a lot of, I think Robert Johnson, someone that you recommended to me, his books are exceptional. He really gets that essence of what you've described, of the symbol and the ritual and the need. Of course, like a common symbol for a lot of people to awaken love is through a lens of a romantic relationship, for example, and kind of not realizing that all the symbols in our reality that we choose to allow ourselves to awaken, we've already unconsciously chosen the symbol in our reality as the thing.
Absolutely.
So it's like, when you realize, that was a big insight for me when I realized, like, it's not that these symbols are just there. Like, I'm already the chooser of the symbol, and I'm reminding myself through the symbol, and this kind of awakening that comes from that. And then exploring, and the thing that's so important of that, when you say, like, you don't, it's not a need, it's not an over reliance, but it's like a choice, and it's a delight. It's, this is beautiful. I can enjoy it more almost because I'm not fused or attached to it as being my savior. I'm not attached to it as being something I need to survive. And I've experienced that. For me, in the beginning, meditation was medication, and it was something I felt I had to do. I've got to meditate. And I remember my partner at the time, I was saying to her, like, I've got to meditate today, or else I'm going to feel really anxious, like, if I haven't meditated. And it was that kind of reliance that reminded me of when I was on antidepressants. I forgot to take my tablet today. Now I feel anxious. So this is a really crucial distinction, I think, of if you're almost freer to choose to have that spontaneous, fun, and even playful relationship with all the things that bring you joy, when you know you don't actually need them. Like, it's not something that you feel you really need, but you're like, I want it because it's nice. I want it because it's fun. I want it because it actually, the process of symbolizing is in itself an act of creation.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. And there's perhaps the next stage is just It's all joy and creativity. It's co-creation. I'm constantly in co-creation with consciousness and all its varied manifestations, recognizing that they are me, but respecting their unique difference at the same time, and enjoying that dance, and being in awe of the creativity of life to progress consciousness. You know, it's like staying in that state of curiosity and openness. It's like, particularly at this time of the world's, world history, is like, we be a lot to judge in the world, but what would it be like to step back and go, wow, what if these events that are happening now, that seem to be so polarized, are actually consciousness evolving itself, and it's not as dystopian as it looks. That actually there's perhaps this is an awakening. This is consciousness talking to itself. And then, what part am I playing in that? Am I perpetuating the surface level argument, or am I actually staying in relationship with the possibility this is a way in which consciousness is evolving itself? It's revealing itself to itself. So
the collective fragmentation we spoke earlier about within, it's like collectively, the more reality becomes polarized, it's got to implode and kind of fall in on itself.
Absolutely.
The more into that non-dual kind of essence.
That's beautiful. And I was just thinking, there's a lot of words here, and if I look at my own journey, I think, what has this whole spiritual path thing been about? It's been wonderful. It's been an adventure, but ultimately it's just been a journey back to loving myself and recognizing what it means to be sovereign. That this human experience is a really precious thing, and from a place of sovereignty over my heart, my mind, my body, my spirit, we can do amazing things. And I think it's as simple as that. For me, it's been a journey of recovery and then discovery.
And it's awakening into our higher nature of love and connection and empathy. I think this is, I feel like, such a beautiful way to kind of bring this to a close. And I've got, what our conversations are like. I've just got one word that's come to mind that I want
to go. Yeah, go.
I want to just explore because it's there and I can't ignore it.
Yeah, go.
The word is the metaverse.
Yeah.
And the reason that comes to mind is that I'm concerned that it looks like collectively the level of disenchantment with the material, because the material has been stripped of its sentience and its essence. It looks like something to be controlled, commodified, used, right? That collectively we're in a state of such disenchantment that we've had to use technology to create a parallel reality that people find more engaging and more real than the bountiful, beautiful, endlessly miraculous reality that we live in. And that if we actually can connect to that within ourselves and witness that in the simplicity of nature and existence, I don't see something like the metaverse functioning. I don't see how it could function, because people would be like, it's not a hyper. I feel like this, virtual reality is like a hyper reality, but in actuality, it's an attempt to reclaim the lucidity of existence that has been lost.
It is, and it's sadly looking in the wrong direction. I think what Jung said is quite true. It's like that, there are the space on the inside is far greater than the entire universe of multiple universes and galaxies, and so there's, in creating such things as the metaverse, I think humanity is looking at the option on the inside. I think, that's not worth it. We'll create something different. And I think that actually is a huge question that maybe needs exploring in a different conversation, which is about we collectively have an immature inner life. We're scared of looking inside. It's frightening. So we'd rather go into another alternative reality. It's an ersatz reality. It's not the same. I think it was funny. I saw recently that the Icelandic tourist board have put out a an advert for Iceland that mimics the advert that was created by the Facebook founder for the metaverse. So the guy dressed up a bit like him and saying, wow, come, we want to tell you about a new way to connect with reality and without being really weird.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
And he's effectively saying, it's nature, it's
this
here.
is it.
Yeah, and he's doing it in a way where he says, look, this is moss, you can touch it. But don't touch it because it's very fragile. And it's so there's something, you know, you're right. It's ironic, but I think also consciousness itself. This is something I learned again from the teacher Drunvalo Melchizedek. Sometimes there's this, you know, consciousness itself wants to know all possibilities. That's one viewpoint. You know, it wants to experience itself. So it may want to experience itself in, you know, through inside this virtual reality that is even more disconnected from potentially from self. But let's not rule out the possibility that some elements of that technology might actually also serve people in, you know, recovering to self. I think there's been some good experiments with virtual reality to have people resensitize themselves to self when they've been through trauma and so on. But again, I think with regard to technology, it's how we use it. We have to be discerning, you know, is it just because we can, we're going to do it. And it's a confection. It's a, you know, it's a wow factor without any substance. Or are we actually using that technology mindfully to, you know, restore people's sovereignty to you know, relationship with their mind, you know, for mental health, emotionally, helping people resolve trauma, physically, you know, helping people become experience more mobility, for example, or to transform, you know, unique challenges with regard to the use of senses, sight, hearing, etc. I think it's all about how we use it. But yeah, I share your concern, and I'm also curious too, because my hope is that it would be a bit like this. This was really fun when we got this 10 years ago. Applications, but applications are boring. they don't really do much. It's kind of it's a utility. It's a bit like, you know, electricity or water in your house. So something to have, but you know, I don't want it to dominate my life. So hopefully the metaverse will be like that. You know, its gloss will quickly wear off.
Yeah, and truth surfaces, and I think, you know, you look at people really switched on now to how harmful, you know, too much screen time can be, and excessive mobile use and social media. So I think that curve will eventually catch up. Of we inherently do know what's good for us, and it's just how we can adapt and move in that direction.
Maybe that's a good last word, is that, since we're talking about that, because is that really, I think, is a good hallmark of a good spiritual practice, is it's one that invites you to turn your senses, which are continuously being drawn outward into the screen world, to turn them inwards, and to turn that gaze inwards to meditate upon the self, right? And to explore what that is, and explore and resolve what gets in the way. And you know, that I think is a good benchmark for the window shopping experience. So I wonder if I can jump in here, Ricky, and say, because since you brought up the Jungian dimension, that you and I had talked about doing a couple of further podcasts to explore some of the key archetypes that are that we feel are so crucial to understand at this time in human history.
This is something I think is absolutely needed, and I think this discussion as well is a great segue into it, because we've explored these, like, you know, the idea of inner archetypes and projection, the relationship between an individual awakening and the collective. So yeah, we're having conversations. We've got a few ideas of what archetypes to explore, right? Like the magician,
I think we agreed we want to start with the wounded healer, which really gives us a lens into kind of victim saviorhood. And then we also want to look at the magician / seer. You know, they're very much of a similar ilk. You know, archetypes are not kind of fixed. They morph one into another, because that really gives us an idea about truth, essentially.
Yeah.
A way of discerning truth in a world of misinformation. So I think those are going to be exciting things to explore, and I think we agreed that we're going to introduce a framework that helps people to understand what is the healthy expression of the archetype and what are some of the shadow polarities that they create, and how to recognize them and how to work with them in order to resolve those polarities within yourself, so that you can align with the vitality of the archetype itself for your own growth and in service of others. So
I'm glad that you're willing to co-create this with me.
Oh, absolutely, it's going to be fun.
Great.
Yeah. And I think the format would be slightly different. We'd probably have some presentation there. There'd be some pictures.
I love a good picture. We'll get a spreadsheet on the go. That's my shtick.
Not death by PowerPoint, just a few nice
just
pictures.
A few with some nice like animated GIFs maybe as well.
Maybe.
I mean, I think it's such a great discussion for us to share, because that's also part of our, I think both of us get a lot from the Jungian depth psychology as well as the non-dual.
Absolutely.
And Nick, I really want to thank you for joining me on the show. You know that my gratitude extends and transcends just this time we spent talking. You mentioned the people that appear at the right time, and I know we met through synchronicity. I give a shout out to Josh, connection to
my nephew.
So Nick's nephew Josh, I went to uni with, and I actually wrote an article on mindfulness, I think it was, when I was at uni, and we were in brief contact then. But really, I cannot understate the importance of having people on the path that can help guide, and you've been an immense guide for me, and you continue to be. So thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to pay forward the similar support that I've received from multiple people, and let's hope that that's the way it is, for everyone, that we create that ripple effect. So it's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the next time, and continuing to watch Mind That Ego and what you're doing evolve. You're creating some amazing tools that are going to be the wake-up call for quite a lot of people. You're offering the code that kind of is going to match quite a lot of people, I think. So especially around the world of trauma and a depression, which I think you approach with such honesty and courage. And to not stigmatize it, and to say that it is not mutually exclusive from having a spiritual experience at all.
It can be a catalyst.
Absolutely,
sure.
Thank you, Ricky.
That, Nick. Thank you so much, and we'll both be back very soon with the discussion of archetypes.
Look forward to it.
So, thank you.